Good afternoon. My name is Bahman Yazdanfar, and this is Turnaround, a weekly program brought to you by my colleague John Hardy and I to discuss different aspects of the human interactions in the organization, in institutions, in the family environment, in community. And during the last few weeks, we try to get to the different angle of why this communication or interactions sometimes works and most of the time has some sort of the conflicts. We focused on the issue of the lying, issue of the admiration society. We talk about the issues of the human habits, elements of the pleasure versus the authenticity, and so on. This week, my colleague John, since I mentioned in the past that he has his own system of the promoting or in fact interacting with this kind of the problem and resolve them, he has some sort of the very unique concept that we want to have him to explain to you, to see if you can use any part of that in your daily activities when you confront someone else, whether you like them or not. So, John?
Yes, hi, Bob.
How are you doing?
Again.
I'm looking at that monitor that I see you on guard. What is that? Tell me what is that about. You mentioned about something about Tai Chi, but I don't know what is that. What this has to do with the CSP that you are consulting.
Well, I mean, in essence, what okay, if we look at Tai Chi, what Tai Chi is, it's the Taoist system's expression in human movement. So it's to say that it's like in computers you have assembler language, the 0 and 1s, which lies below the code. The yin and the yang, the positive and the negative, these forces represent the assembler language of the human condition in Taoism. And so Tai Chi is, in a way, a demonstration of how these play out.
How so? Because I exercised Tai Chi like about 12, 13 years ago for a very short period of time, few months. I got really bored of that personally, or maybe I was not disciplined at that time. But I found it, first of all, is a little bit tricky, is a little bit difficult to continue, even though it seems from outside is very smooth, soft kind of the action. But when I was doing that, I noticed it's very difficult to stay in the one position or one stance for a long period of time, or focusing on the, let's say, joints of the knees or the hips and so on. So how are you talking about the physical aspect of that, or are you talking about the movement of that?
Well, actually, if we just take a look at the screen, just the opening position, without even starting the video and demonstrating the form.
Okay.
And there's a picture of myself in the opening position.
It's like you're trying to draw your guns.
Well, that's not the intention. I think this is a more aggressive version, or you're paranoid, one of the two. But anyways, what you're essentially, you're one standing there. And the idea, it's interesting, with trees in the background, the metaphor is the tree. So what happens is as you're standing there, there's, for instance, a 10 count. Starts off as 1, fun. So the first one is the inner smile. So you imagine yourself looking at somebody who you love very much, a child, a pet, a lover, or whoever, and them looking at you, and you take that love, take it into your eyes, and you actually swallow it down into your stomach.
Okay.
It's an interesting notion. So the idea.
Are you talking about breathing?
No, you just swallow it down.
Okay.
And and one of the keys is this is visceral. It's taking it into the body. It's not a concept of it. You're actually taking it, swallowing it, imagining it actually as a pool in your dantian, which is about 2 inches below your navel. Right?
Okay.
Then 2 would be shu. You would focus on the feet.
Okay.
And extending. Actually, at that point, it's just an awareness of the feet, your connection to the ground. Right?
Okay.
The 3 would be tree. So now you imagine yourself a tree.
And so that is why you put the background of the tree, because you want to show that your position is kind of similar to a tree.
Exactly. So now you see some sort of movement of the tree, But now we're actually now into the form. Now we'll watch. This is the yang form. So as you see these movements, in a way it would be like a tree swaying in the wind.
Okay.
Before one movement completes, the next one starts, and it's just an easy, flowing movement. Continuous and even. Okay? That then is just the opening paragraph of the yang form.
And
Okay.
well, what is this signifies?
Now, I mean, there are so many metaphors there, but let's just say
No,
going
from
back-
your perspective.
No,
yeah.
exactly. But going
Yeah.
back to the original, and at this point, let's lock it there. Yeah, exactly, in that position. If we lock it in that position, what we're doing is, so okay, at first we're extending down into the ground.
Okay.
We're connecting, the rooting. And so the idea is rooting to that which is around us.
Okay.
Right, rooting into the ground, beyond that which is around us. Because if we think about life in the game, right, what we're actually being done, what's happening is we're really being suspended in the air. We're not connected to the ground, and we're not connected to the sky. The ground being earth, which is the yin
Okay.
energy, right? And it's connected to, sort of our core essence as just human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part of the extension is when we start to focus on the upper.
Okay.
So the body's extending upwards. So it's imagining yourself from the waist down as if you were literally buried in the earth. So you're rooted into the ground.
That is why you bend your knees.
Somewhat, exactly. You're keeping yourself flexible. And then from the waist upwards, you extend upwards to the sky.
Okay.
And so what happens is that's the yang energy from above, the yin from below, and the two mix in the center. Now, and so at the same time, there's a dynamic tension because you're pulling in opposing directions.
Okay.
Now, this state then is you're connecting above, which is then connecting to essence, to yourself, to your essence as a person, who you really are, right?
The
You're-
upper part of the
Yeah, the upper, or symbolizes
Yeah.
that. That's drawing from the heaven.
is
that
the one
energy.
for the yang come,
That's the yang.
which is the positive
Well,
male.
Well, yeah, but in a sense, it doesn't really signify
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
They're constantly opposing forces.
Okay.
But yes, generally speaking, it's the male, it's the assertive versus the passive, right?
Okay.
Then what happens is so we have that, the upper.
Yeah.
But the thing is, even that, connecting to our essence without connecting to the earth, connecting to our, who we actually are just as beings, right?
Okay.
Is not particularly useful. You have to have both. And it's this mixing of these two energies that is absolutely core for being, in a way, stable and connected, like the tree, right?
Okay.
So imagine when the wind comes, it cannot blow over the tree because it's so well rooted.
Okay.
At the same time, what allows the tree to grow is that it extends up to the sky, extending up to the sun.
Like a
right?
photosynthesis or getting
All that, exactly.
Sun ray and all.
And the sun rays, exactly. So what's happening is you've got these two forces, which are always mixing and blending. Now, what's crucial when you're engaging with the world, right, and the game, is that the game is like a continuous swirl.
Okay.
So the first thing you have to be able to do in order to engage with the game,
You have
to
be
engage with
grounded.
life, is to be able to stand still.
Yeah. You need to be grounded. Yeah.
Because most of us, when you really come to think of it, are not standing still. We're just being swept around, and because everybody else.
We are reactive. We discussed that
Right.
we are very reactive.
So what's happening is we're all on a merry-go-round, so we perceive ourselves to be standing still because of the fact that relative to those around us we might be, but in actual fact we're all being swept. So the thing then is that if you have the ability to disengage and break out of this swirl, it's only at that moment that you start to have perspective. It's only at that moment that you start to become really connected to who you are as opposed to being just another kind of exponent, extension of the game, right? Or the matrix,
last week
or whatever.
we discussed that the authenticity of the individuals
Exactly.
versus the admiration of society.
So then what we have is that I would describe as, let's say when we look at Tai Chi from that point of view, we're looking at, breathing, we're looking at connecting, we're looking at all of these things would relate to relaxation, and I would say also to self-mastery. Okay? So now, when we get to, let's just say, the next form, Chris, if you want to show the next. Now I don't know quite what we're doing here.
We're just getting into it now.
Okay.
Chen?
Yes, this is the Chen form. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So here it's just gathering up the energy from the ground.
From the ground or from the above?
There you go. It's really from the hands. It's from the ground. It's loading up energy, and now you'll see it start. Now this is actually more of what Tai Chi used to be. See this winding, bending, twisting energy. It's coiling. And so it was the same as the other form, except that here there's much more coiling. And what that is twisting and winding energy within the body. And so on a physical level, that kind of form, you're actually developing the muscles, not just the muscles, but the sinews, the tendons, everything.
Okay.
In a way like the way an animal actually develops their strength.
Okay.
And that creates, without increasing bulk and size, it's giving you this kind of tensile, active, agile strength, which is actually extremely, useful for sport, for anything. But also in terms of is when people get older, what happens is that it might not extend the length of their lives, but it keeps them moving like a 25-year-old throughout their life.
And
an agile 25-year-old.
And the metaphor of this act in the social environment?
Well, when we get into the social environment, the idea is that as energy is coming in, as we're flowing, we're continuously bending and flowing with it. So even though
that
we're
means
staying
we change
still,
ourselves and our reactions constantly.
exactly, and we're reading, so that we're always listening. So what's happening is, even as you're doing the form, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you start off doing the form, it's the physical, it's an outer movement, right? And so you would look at this, and then you would have a movement that, precisely follows a certain arc, right?
Okay.
But then over time, the focus, it's in a way, it's almost like you think spiritually. The opening position, how we are in the world, is as a body with a spirit connected to it, right? But the focus is on the body.
Okay.
Right? So that is this one, right? And then it's all precise, particular. But now if we take, say, the same movement, and we start to introduce this and bend and twist, then what's happening is it's actually the spirit that's the energy that's moving, and I'm not even aware at this point. It's more that just energy is flowing and the body's following what is happening and doing. That's what creates that fluidity. So in an athlete, it's the same thing. That, for instance, the novice in a sport is going to be very conscious of technique, whereas the master of the sport, what's happening is essentially the technique is so deeply embedded in them that they just manifest it, perfectly and easily.
So what you are saying here is
it's really this principle of mastery in many ways.
I just want to be clear. Is this Tai Chi and these movements is metaphor of what actually people do, or is a metaphor of people should learn how to do this?
Well, what is taking place is we're always moving, right?
Yes.
Now, the thing about it is that what this is movement with grace. So if we look at Tai Chi, how do we achieve grace, right?
So it is like, before you collaborate on that, that means if I put someone like this movement of the ones that you just show,
yes,
and the movement of someone in the corner of the Dundas and
right,
Young that is just moving frantically,
let's just say, depending on their mental state. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Let's say being very normal kind
Right.
of the thing. Okay. But there is no kind of the fluidity to the movement. So these two could be symbolize of what we actually do, most of the people, and the one that on the corner of the young and Dundas.
Well, that's one extreme of it.
And
yeah.
if you want to be a little bit advanced, to be control of your life to some extent, or to your communication, you have to learn to move like this.
Metaphorically, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the beauty of this is that, in a way, what's happening is, I mean, we're integrated systems. So what happens is that whatever we're doing, every part of us is always doing, right? So an example, let's just say we take a course which is helping us to be calmer, right?
Okay. Like
Now,
like anger management.
Anger management, or meditation, whatever the course is, right? Well, the thing is, you take this course, and then you go out into the world, and you might have a perception that you're calmer, but you could easily be completely wrong about your perception that in fact you're
Which
calmer.
it happened.
Exactly,
Happens, yeah.
because you would like to think that you're calmer, because the ego then becomes invested in having taken this course to feel that at least I'm doing it right, which means I'm calmer. But very often we're not, or at least marginally, and we feel we're calmer, but nobody else does, right? Now, the thing with Tai Chi, and with Tai Chi, let's say, as opposed to yoga in a sense, and various other things, and yoga is very, very good for what it is. But I would say what Tai Chi actually allows you to do is to, as you're doing the Tai Chi, and as you're actually watching your form, you're immediately getting feedback as to where you are, because your body is
From your
manifesting.
body,
Exactly.
from your own body. Yeah.
So even as you're doing your form, one day it's tenser, one day it's lighter. So that at first you're thinking in terms of the act of gaining the skill. But once you've actually mastered it to a certain degree, now you start to actually listen. And this is the key, it's the listening of the form, right? That what we're actually doing most of the time is we're active, but we're not listening. People are speaking, we're not even listening as they're speaking, because we're waiting for them to finish so we can speak. We're so preoccupied with our own thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the moment that we actually are able to get past ourselves and just engage with the other person, even as we're communicating with them, we can actually be connecting to their listening to our speaking, right? Which then, of course, is going to always feed back on our speaking and instantly calibrate it to where they are. So that makes for excellent communication. And it's not like you have to take long courses. Really, if you just simply do that, you're instantly aligning with whoever you're speaking with.
So a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about focusing on the utilizing our five senses. So
Right.
what you're saying just now is, if with this exercise or this kind of the practice, one could understand or learn, even subconsciously or automatically, after a while.
Autonomically, actually, it's
Yeah.
very correct.
Yeah.
We'll get into that next.
To understand, to listen to the body, to his or her own body. And by focusing on that, then when it comes to the actual interaction with other people, because that become a practice cognitively or even subconsciously, automated system like in our brain. Therefore, before react like a previous, before this start, then they start to listen to their body, that what I am getting from that, that communication.
Okay, one. Now another thing is starting to take place is, I mean, there's so many levels to this, because an example is focus, hard focus versus soft focus.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in hard focus, you are, it's more the mental, the cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm speaking now, what am I saying, what is my message, etc., right? It's breaking it up, it's linear.
Okay.
But with your eyes, and the way to actually do this practice is, let's just say you're looking at a certain point off in the distance and you fix on one point, that's hard focus. So now go off to 2 points either side of that central point. And let's just say they're 10 feet apart. And then keep your eye looking at the center point, but now inside you're actually paying attention to those 2 other points. It actually, what it leads to is what's called a soft focus.
Yeah, like a flood system of the light.
Now, the moment you do that, it actually shifts you into your autonomic nervous system. It's all kinds of changes are actually happening. But what's very interesting, if you're thinking about something, any topic, and you just practice that, instantly your perspective on what you're thinking will change. So what happens is it's breaking you out of the local perspective. So now what's happening is, okay, if I'm on the fixed perspective, I'm speaking to you, I'm here, you're there. If I go into the softer perspective, now I'm actually focusing on, in a way, the space between us, the relationship between us, as opposed to us separately. So now it's not like a me and you or us, it's just a kind of global perspective. Now, this is a somewhat of a higher level thing that you don't do immediately. But what I'm really trying to convey is the idea that within these simple movements, there's all of this is going on.
So are you suggesting that doing that physical movement automatically after a while condition a person to do that mentally the
As
same
well.
That is what
Exactly, because
your message.
you can't help it. You can't help it. As one part of your system changes in consciousness, it transfers to everything else. Now, this is just on the individual level, but once we switch over to, let's say, the two-person level, there is another kind of Tai Chi called push hands, where the two are doing it in a kind of figure-8 movement with the wrists touching back and forth as they're going, one opposing the other.
Okay.
And this becomes a perfect mirror or metaphor for relationship, where you're seeing in this relationship that as the hands are moving,
Okay.
and they're going backwards and forwards. As two people are doing this, you'll get to see, for instance, too much aggression, where they're pushing too hard. You'll also get to see, for instance, too much rigidity, which is the opposite fear, where it's stiff, or they just collapse and they're not able to respond to the push. And then or you'll see actually a very, very fluent and the kind of ideal relationship where it's just flowing, a kind of dynamic tension. As one asserts, the other one yields. And the one who yields now begins to assert. So it's just like dancing, right? In excellent dancing, okay, the man leads, but the man initiates the lead. Then from that point on, like you watch excellent salsa dancing, from that point on, in a way, there's a passing back and forth of the lead. In a way, very, very gently, it's passing back and forth between the two, and that is, excellent dancing, perfect communication. And I would say that perfect relationship, communication, etc., is that it's not static. So it's not perfect in the sense of a fixed. What's perfect about it is that it is continuous, authentic, and flowing. It's never getting stuck. So an example, relationship. If we take a look at most relationships, what ends up happening is eventually you get a dominant, and this is what this whole, kind of sadomasochism, the dominant submissive we were talking about in the game. Mm. If you look about just about any relationship, whether it's between siblings, whether it's spousal, whether it's at work, what you'll end up finding is sooner or later one becomes the dominant, the other one submissive. And the problem is once that happens, the energy now is stopped flowing, and what you've really got is a rigid relationship, which is kind of mutually reinforcing pathology, which is in a sense sucking energy from both of them, rather than a healthy relationship, which I would define as is nourishing both.
So in this kind of double Tai Chi, do you suggest that the parties should be in some form of the relationship with each other?
No, what I mean is when you're doing two-person Tai Chi, you will instantly, if you have two people doing this, you will instantly get to see one, the attitude of each. You will get to see the relationship that exists between them.
No, I mean in the practical. Let's say we are not psychotherapists, we are not counselors, but let's say a couple go for counseling.
Yeah.
And so happen that their therapist or counselor has to be a Tai Chi guy like yourself, practice Tai Chi, and suggest them to go to a few course of Tai Chi, and then he or she has to observe them when they do that.
It wouldn't even take that. He could immediately, with almost no prior knowledge, just with 5 minutes instruction of actually just doing this exercise,
Yeah.
right? As they were doing it, they would instantly exhibit.
No, who is resistant, who is rigid, who is that, and so.
And what's wonderful about it would be that they're getting to actually experience this in vivo, live, but in a way that they can't deny it even to themselves.
Who the performer
people,
or the people who observe them?
No, the people.
Yeah.
The subjects.
The audience.
Well, no, the subjects, the people who are actually...
the subjects, okay.
The ones who are actually doing it.
But maybe they know it, but they don't want to show it. They
Very often people are not aware of what their patterns are. And so what happens then is it pulls into in stark clarity their patterns. And in the process, the moment you call a pattern into awareness, it'll affect the pattern.
So so let's say, I'm just a little bit throwing some sort of the analogy. Let's say you go to a company, and that company has, let's say, talk about, let's say, the higher rank of the company,
Right.
which is a board of director, and there is, let's say, 6 or 7 vice president.
Yeah.
I'm just using that. I know it's very stupid, but
No, actually it
But-
isn't. I mean, this could apply to that situation too.
And then you say, okay, I'm going to have 1 hour of your time, and during that 1 hour, I want after my instruction, 5 or 10 minutes, I want to pair up each one of them one by one with the different people, and for 5 minutes do what I told you to do.
Or even simultaneously, what we could have is and constantly switching partners. Exactly.
I'm just
yes.
a number vice president of this
Right.
with that, and then vice president, the same vice president with another vice president. So, do you suggest that that after end of this session, you will be able to, from the observer, be able to say who is really working with with another person in congruent way, or someone is working against?
Put it this way, you wouldn't even have to wait. It would happen within seconds. First of all, you'd be able to see it. Let's say, if I'm the moderator...
No, I'm not focusing on the timing of that.
No,
I'm saying just by observing that.
So what would become immediately apparent is the patterns of each individual, the patterns within the relationships. Yes, that would become very clear. Now, of course, it would become clearer to me because I've done this for a long, long time than it would be to those others. But eventually what would happen is over the course of that hour, that would be shared. And as it comes into awareness, it will automatically impact that pattern. So as they become aware that this is the pattern,
Themselves.
So let's just say you have let's just say the two of us are two VPs, right?
Okay.
And we're two guys who basically just don't get along. We're constantly at loggerheads. We're going to do this, and the tension is going to show up.
Okay.
Okay. Now, chances are that each of us is going to believe that we're let's say in my case, I'll think that I'm the one who's being reasonable and Bauman's being unreasonable, right? And vice versa.
Yes.
But what will happen here is we'll get to see what really goes on during the Tai Chi, right? And then what will happen is there will be a transference back for each to understand, this is actually the action-reaction which is taking place when we interact. Now, the moment that happens, the person is being moved from thinking about just their perspective to a greater frame, which is a perspective of the relationship, right? Both of those parties is now being shifted to that other perspective. Instantly.
That's a little bit hard to imagine.
Actually, it's not even imagine. It would happen by itself. It would happen without them even being aware that it happened. That's the beauty of it. Because the moment that they are now engaging with the relationship in a way that they can actually see it, then what happens is that metaphor then transfers back to the relationship.
So is this some sort of the very simple
diagnostic in a sense.
Diagnostic or awareness moment kind of the thing.
Precisely. In fact, what it really is, I mean, Tai Chi I really think of as
self-awareness
is a mindfulness exercise. Mindfulness, the problem with the word and everything is that people talk about mindfulness, but while you're talking about mindfulness, you're not being mindful, you just become almost further removed from that which you're trying to be mindful about. What Tai Chi does, which is wonderful, is it tricks you into being mindful. It just throws you into it.
Those who cannot discipline themselves to be mindful, therefore they can use this
It's
to...
not just discipline. It's the
No,
thing
no,
is
I'm
that we
saying
can
it's
even
the-
trick ourselves into thinking we're being mindful. With the beauty of Tai Chi is this, you can't fool yourself, because what's happening is you're getting instant automatic feedback. So what's happening is, one, you're getting a diagnostic. So let's say there's the two of us. We're now getting a diagnostic on what our relationship is right now.
Okay.
So to the extent that we wish to change it, we now are in a position, because we're aware of it, to start to change it. Now, what then will happen over time too is that if we were to keep doing Tai Chi, keep doing this push hands exercise over the course of, a year, we would actually continuously being given feedback between ourselves of where we are now, what's going on, which then would create a situation where you don't need the external party to regulate this relationship.
Or arbitrator.
It would become self-regulating, and so that would actually make for a very harmonious environment. And so that would be an example of how this could be very effectively used in any kind of group situation, even with children in school.
What is the role of mind in that? The role of conscious mind?
You know what's beautiful?
Because
very little.
Let me clarify
Yeah.
that. Hypnotic.
Mhm.
Usually, hypnotherapists, even the best hypnotherapists in the world, believe that you have to be in the condition of the accepting, or a willingness to accept the hypnotic state in order to go to the hypnotic
Actually,
state.
no, you don't. But anyways, go on,
Okay.
because we'll get into that discussion.
Yeah. Because in this case, do they have to have that willingness? That is my question. Whether or not, I'm not talking about
No,
hypnotic,
actually,
I just heard
the thing is that, interestingly enough, if we go to hypnosis, what's not understood about hypnosis is, and having studied it, we spend most of our time in trance states.
Of course.
Right? Because to not be in a trance state, to be so awake that we're not in a trance state, takes a lot of mental energy. So the natural path of least resistance, the flow, is to be in a trance state, okay? So what Tai Chi is, or not just Tai Chi, but let's just say hypnosis is doing, is you're taking a person to a place where they actually wish to go. So what'll happen is, yes, they can resist it, but the thing is that often, you can be resisting here and I come in there. So what a hypnotist can do is actually use the resistance. And here's an example of two-person Tai Chi, where a person's pushing here, and what's happened is, let's just say we're doing it, and I'm pushing against you like this. You're pushing hard against this hand. And so then what I do is I give you resistance here, because I want to draw your attention here.
withdraw from somewhere else.
And as you focus here, and I'm drawing all your attention here, then I uproot you with this hand, right? And I can, do what I wish with this hand.
Yeah.
So the idea then being that, let's say a hypnotist, if he runs into resistance, will do that. They'll use the resistance as actually a tool that they can actually use to help them hypnotize the other person if they're very skilled. So the willingness is not that. It's more that there are certain people who are less susceptible than others. But when it comes to this, I would actually say that no, it's just mirroring our behavior. So when something mirrors your behavior, you can resist it and you can say, well, I'm not doing that. But the problem is that when it's mirrored physically, maybe you can just for a face-saving, on a face-saving basis, deny it so publicly. But internally, not likely. On some level, it'll seep in. You'll realize this is what I'm doing.
That is why, because you were talking about if they continue, let's say, for 1 year, and it helps to the kind of the connection and relationship without having the third party to engage in the relationship. I'm just wondering if even that awareness come internally, still there has to be a willingness to continue when they continue to let it go or to compromise.
Because the unconscious basically operates. We're 98% or whatever unconscious, 2% conscious, right? So what happens
Some
is
people
that
say 10, 90.
or no, it's not even close.
Yeah.
It's way above 10, 90. So what happens is that once you start a movement on the unconscious level, the conscious cannot resist it. And that's the whole point. It's just like changing habits. The problem with changing habits is that the habit is rooted in the unconscious, and then the conscious is trying to move it. And it's basically the mouse trying to move the elephant. Whereas if you're able to actually reach the unconscious level and start the movement, now the conscious basically, it's like now the elephant's moving and the mouse better, jump on because there's nothing for it to do. So this is really the point of this, and this is the huge advantage of it, is it's so easy because it's actually congruent with our natural way of being.
Is there any way that you can use part of the this practice? I'm talking about Tai Chi to enhance the process of the replacing habit or get rid of habits, certain bad habits that you unwanted, not bad, unwanted habits?
No, at the very least, what it's doing is it will pull up to us. One of the biggest problems with any habit is that there's a denial phase, that we say we don't have it, right?
That is why I brought the issue of the willingness.
But the point is that once we actually cannot deny that we have it, because we're physically manifesting it in this exercise, sooner or later, it just becomes just more and more difficult to deny, where it's only the cognitive denying it, but the unconscious is essentially, or the semi-conscious is basically now more and more creating a pressure to do something. Because once you call a negative habit into awareness, that creates a tension.
Of course, it's internal conflict.
As an internal conflict.
Yeah.
It was like the same thing as like my eating the veal, right? Like, okay, I was eating veal and basically I kind of knew.
Good up until the week before.
Yeah, because I basically was able to kind of compartmentalize in my mind. I kind of knew what was happening with the veal, but it wasn't really, making the connection. So boom, I can compartmentalize and I can just march off and then have the veal sandwich and not connect to what I know is going on, right? Well, the point at which I could know, when that link broke, right? Once it's broken, I can't go back. And this is the point of consciousness. You can try, but no longer, now you're having to force yourself. It just won't work. And so that your unconscious now is, instead of working against you, is now working for you. And so, yes, these kinds of exercises would have that impact. And now, that's in relationship. Now, if, for instance, you were to actually could model conflict like this, even strategy, in the sense that your certain opponents, strategically, are, for instance, let's just say, too yang. They're going to come in too hard. So the idea will be, let's just say in that strategy, where you set up a situation where you provoke them to overextend themselves, to put themselves in a position where essentially they've overextended. So that would be an example of where it's adversarial. Or let's just say when someone overextends and pushes the hand, then one can basically return back and flow it back. One can actually, once the person's overextended, pull them over and unbalance them. Or they can actually kind of tie them up and then jam them so that, in a sense, play the whole thing and come back
like
at them.
Operation.
And actually, in a sense, uproot them completely and finish them off. So what it then does is, it takes emotions out of conflict. So on the one hand, it can reduce conflict and make it so that you're, it's just like, for instance, when you take a look at somebody who would be either a commando or a hardened criminal from the streets, right? That kind of person, when they're confronted with an aggressive situation, compared to the average person, is going to be incredibly cool, which will give them a huge advantage in that situation. So if they wish to be aggressive, then they certainly can have the advantage and take that situation and play it to their advantage. And at the same time too, if they're actually confronted by an aggressor, they will also have the choice of being able to deflect it because they won't feel threatened. And so that in most cases, it would be a wonderful way, and what it'll lead to, let's say collectively, is less conflict. Because most of the time, the reason why aggression escalates is that the person who's experiencing the aggression is feeling threatened by it.
And
reacting.
Yeah.
But for instance, if the person's being aggressive and all you have to do is just turn and deflect it, the need to take action, the stress created by it, all these things will be experienced in a completely different way, right? And so all of this, in a sense, can come out of Tai Chi, yes.
Let me be a little bit of the Bahman advocate.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The show wouldn't be the show if we didn't get Bashman somehow rearing his charming head.
My horn has to come out.
Yes, exactly. What we should get is a special outfit.
If what you say is correct,
yes.
Because again, I don't have any. I mean, as I said, I practiced Tai Chi maybe 12, 13 years ago for 5-6 months, and that's it. That was the end of the extent of that.
You obviously stopped just before you could really.
Probably I didn't have anything to really discover.
Well,
my
yes,
brain was empty. My subconscious was completely.
Well, you'd completed
vacuumed already.
The man is an island program, so that there was very little more for you that this worth.
But I can
offer.
relate at the time when I was younger and I was doing some martial arts here and there. I remember we used to go and do the same exercise over and over again.
That's right.
And the interesting thing was, which I bring to my question after this preamble kind of thing. I remember we were standing there, the yellow belt, the green belt, the brown belt, the black belt, all of them do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only difference would appear when there was some sort of the exhibit of the sparring, and then you see that the movement of the black belt a little bit with, as you call it, with much more grace and softness and smoother than the guy who does the same thing with the green belt.
Exactly.
So and I asked one of my masters or instructors that what we are getting to that. He said it's the same movement. You have to focus on the basic and the simplicity to the point that you become master of those simple things.
Which is true of everything, actually. It's
Which
the
is
basic
true,
principles.
which I practice it in life as well as, not because of the exercise, not because of what he said, but later on I found it that it's true.
Well, you look at sales, everything comes down to a few fundamentals you have to do right.
It's always basics. The fundamentals are important to be mastered. Then you can bring your own.
Exactly. Only then can you really introduce individuality.
Decoration or whatever.
That's right.
Now brings the question. Tai Chi is has a long history of being practiced, and what you said in association with the real life interaction, if it is that effective, how come till now no one in the, let's say, in companies or in the big organization hasn't initiated, or has it done? I don't know.
You know what's it? I mean, excellent question. And I think one of the things which is, it's just like when karate came across, right? In Japan, karate was karate do, which is a way of life, right?
Yeah.
So what ends up happening, they in a way take the do out of it. They keep the karate. They say this is useful for this.
It was a gluten-free.
Right. They give it. They take a reduced application.
Okay.
Then what they then do is they say, well, if there it's only white belts and black belts. Then here now we have lots of belts because commercially it was a good idea. They could sell the belts. They could run the schools, and also people had this sense of achievement, etc. Right.
And hierarchy.
Hierarchy, exactly. And so what happens is that they took something which is mastery, and they turn it around and turn it into basically
a commercial thing.
Basically a kind of skill set. And And I think the problem is
Why a skill set? Because,
Well,
if you introduce different hierarchy, it doesn't mean that you.
no, because the thing is, mastery is this endless process.
Of course.
Whereas when you break it into a bunch of belts,
Oh,
it's
you mean
basically-
the
it's technical competence.
putting different level of the competency. Okay.
Precisely.
Okay.
So what you've got is two completely different paradigms.
Okay.
So what's happened is that all these various things, to the extent that they are useful, even yoga, for the most part, yoga is successful because of the fact that, you know, attractive people basically figure that it'll make them more attractive, more supple, etc. But for the most part, yoga really started out, hatha yoga, was movements to prepare the body for meditation because spiritual ascendance
Of
was
course.
the point.
In
However,
fact, if you go to India, many are there isolated in
exactly, and their bodies don't look half as good as the people who do practice yoga
Actually,
here.
they're like malnutrition.
Yeah. Right. So what happens is that they take something, they end up extracting an aspect of it, which basically fits into their own culture, and then they march along and say, we're doing yoga. Well, in fact, they're not doing yoga. So in a sense, even though yoga is very popular, for the most part, people are not doing yoga. And Tai Chi didn't have that aspect, which lent itself to, you know, looking better or making yourself more flexible, etc. Right? So it didn't have that kind of physical fitness aspect of it, or on an obvious level.
To put it in the skill set or
so
anything.
Exactly. So what ended up happening was it just sort of said, well, why are we doing this? And it's the returns we're going to get in relation within our consciousness of what we're looking for are, you know, too slow and nebulous. So therefore, it just didn't catch on, right? So in a sense, the problem is that Tai Chi, in a way, defies being a bit like Zen Buddhism. Is that it defies
High-paced society.
being turned into a kind of saleable product, and that's why it didn't catch on. But interesting enough, if you take a look at all those thousands of people who are doing Tai Chi in the parks, right? In China, you would find that very, very few of them, like not 1%, would be thinking of Tai Chi as anything more than a pure exercise. They wouldn't really be extending the metaphor to their lives, which is also very interesting.
Which is my question, because Tai Chi came from that part of the world,
Right.
and Far East, when it's created, it must have some sort of the philosophy attached to it.
It did, but interestingly enough, what ended up happening was that Mao came to a Tai Chi master and basically said, give me a form which I can use as a standard for the population. So when I was showing the two forms,
Yes.
remember how one was more like this,
Yes.
whereas the other one had more of this
Yeah.
movement. Well, the original form that looks like this actually had this in it. So what the master did is, in a sense, he took out a lot of the essence of the form and gave him, in a sense, a bit of an empty shell. It still has value.
Like a simplified version.
Simplified, but worse than simplified. A lot of the value was taken out.
And why is that?
Well, first of all, because of the fact that they would not believe a master. You're not going to give anything. Like in these mastery schools, you do not give. You have to earn what you get. You have to actually show devotion, character, etc. In return, you gain knowledge. Right? There is a certain quid pro quo.
No,
in
I
any
understand
mastery
that
school,
part.
right?
What I'm saying,
But-
where you said Mao did that, what was
Well, no,
what was his object?
Oh, just basically wanted an exercise program for the population, and that's what he got.
Okay. So by generalizing that with the sin, we applying the simplified kind of the form of the Tai Chi, distributing among the whole public. The actual essence and actual philosophy has been somehow taken from the.
Exactly, because the last thing that Mao wanted was for these people to be gaining, especially with communism, was another version, a really harsh version of the game, where he wants people in a certain band of mind control. Well, they start to become spiritually ascendant. That's the last thing that Mao would have wanted.
Okay, so his intention was not to provide a situation for people to start thinking. So
Absolutely not. What he wanted basically
like
is
any other politician.
No, it's basically like maintenance of a car. He wanted worker bees that would last longer, and you could get more mileage out of them. That's what it was about, right? So for the vast majority of Chinese, when they're going about doing that form, they do it beautifully, far better than me, I can tell you. They're more precise and everything, but their entire focus is very much on that precision. And they're very much still on the level of a body with a spirit attached rather than a spirit with a body attached.
Okay, but again, the question is, still some people know the philosophy behind Tai Chi, a lot of people. Why haven't they? First of all, let me ask the question in two parts. First, do you know of any company or any large organization apply this kind of the practice in their daily routine?
No.
No, okay. And second, then come back to my question, and why all of I'm pretty sure there is a couple of billion people in the Far East, and there is a couple of million of companies over there. How come there is no one really using it?
But if you go back to ancient Greece, and if you looked at Socrates,
come to Canada in Toronto and ask John.
No. But the point is, if you take a look at, let's say, ancient Greece, and you look at Socrates, that knowledge was back there. 2,500 years ago?
Yeah.
We had that knowledge, and at the same time, the vast majority of people, are allowed to
don't apply that. Yeah.
do not apply it.
Yeah.
And so the knowledge has always been there. For instance, in the Tao Te Ching, the essential book of Taoism, from which Tai Chi and all these things are derived, where the yin, the yang, all of that is laid out. At the outset of the book, they refer to the knowledge of the ancients. So they're talking about this being
even then, they were referring to the 2000.
So to a previous civilization, possibly, right? So I'm thinking, what we're talking about here is essential knowledge. We're talking about the knowledge which sort of transcends, sort of this existence. It almost comes from a higher level, and I think, that in that sense, and that's one of the reasons why it's so pure. It's just like in computers, right? When you talk to somebody who's a real expert in computers, they can go down to the zeros and the ones, the assembler language, and then right down into the zeros and the ones. But the vast majority of people who are programming are not going to have the capacity to go that far down. They're going to be at the higher level languages, which are further away. So the ability to go to first principles, to go to the essence, which in a way is what the philosopher does, right? Is something that by and large, the vast majority of any population is not so inclined.
That is a good base for this issue, because if you remember, we had a sales seminar here, and
yes,
I mentioned something about the fist, the principle of Bahman, fist of principle or something. And
the fist of fury.
The fist of fury. But I distinguish between the information and knowledge.
Right.
And I emphasize information. You can have all sorts of information, and as long as you don't apply it to the practical matter, it's not a knowledge.
Exactly.
So what you are implying right now, or saying, is, and it makes sense, because it was a good comparison between let's say, the time of the Socrates, Plato, and so on. All of those knowledge has been there for 2,500 years, and every 10-15 years, someone like Anthony Robbins comes and pick up just a couple of the sentences of
and
that,
then presents it as
and then
a novelty.
present it like a novelty, or there's some sort of the vogue or some sort of the fashion, and people fall for that. But the knowledge, the information is there, not the knowledge. But we don't use it to make it a knowledge for us.
Well, and again, it has to do with inclination. Is that, so what I found was that for whatever reason, I had an innate sense of symmetry that I probably had since I was born, right? Where I just would look at things and I see the patterns beneath the surface.
Okay.
So that was my gift, so to speak, okay? So when I was in my teens already, when I was reading Siddhartha and Hermann Hesse, I was already into the esoteric, and I was drawn towards this.
Through the Buddhism and all.
Well,
of
or those authors.
Yeah.
Still Western, but drawing me towards these. But then when I actually went and found Taoism, which is I would say I would be more in my 30s when I really started to examine it or study it. It was like I was given the perfect, clear symmetry, which I sensed before, but here it was laid out beautifully, right? So the moment that I saw it, for me, it was like exactly the thing that I was looking for. So that I could instantly extend it, because it was in a way something that I kind of had a preconception of from the beginning. Whereas the majority of people learn this, essentially they learn it as a bunch of rules that don't correspond to their own inner sense of symmetry, and therefore they can't really make it their own.
Oh, so they just take it like I'm going to the carpentry school. I have to learn how to cut the wood, but the essence of the wood, how it comes through, how to treat the wood, and all of that is not really part of the course. I want to make a furniture out of it.
No, not at all. Like, for instance, the idea of push hands. I've noted. I had the idea that push hands, for instance, would be, let's just say, a wonderful metaphor for relationship, and therefore could be used, let's just say, for corporate training, for relationship building, as well as conflict resolution, negotiating strategy, etc. Right? I mean, no. I mean, when I look at it, this thing's been around for a very long time. And when I look around at corporate training models or anything, I've never seen anything remotely like it.
Okay, let me.
It might exist, but I'm not aware of it.
I mean, we are not aware. There are millions of the companies in the world. Let me ask you this way. Let's say I am a CEO of a company, and you come to me, you manage to get, first of all, to me. That is
I can use Tai Chi to get past the gatekeepers.
The gateway.
Exactly.
Or use one of those magic smoke to just disappear and reappear in the board.
My level, unfortunately, is not quite there. I'm still working on that one, yes.
But we need a magician for that, or illusionist. But let's say you get in front of me, and I am the CEO of the company, and you want to sell this thing to me. To a person that does not believe in this kind of thing, I mean, they want to be polite. They don't say you're lunatic or anything like that, but they say, "Are you?" You want to sell it to me in a
how? I would say through demonstration. It actually, very simply through demonstration, is that because it's going on all the time, I could even describe it in terms of our interaction. I would be able to actually, mirror it back to the person. Or I would say, just if we were to go to a meeting and we look around that meeting, what's going around, I'd be able to tell you what's going on from another perspective. And the thing is, why is it interesting? Because ultimately, what is it really that makes one CEO beat another, or one general beat another, one athlete beat another? It's an edge, right? So if you're able to see things on a deeper level, you're able to see things earlier and more clearly, then you have a permanent built-in edge against your opponent, which means that as time goes on, you'll keep winning.
Okay, the CEO knows that part, but how you convince that this could give that edge to him or
you demonstrate it. You're basically, seeing is believing, right? Okay. So you actually have to be in a meeting and just say, okay, this is it. This is what like for instance, a friend of mine, was involved, and he was interested in making an investment in a company. And it was a startup, and the individual who was on the wishing him to join in was definitely what I would describe as a player. And even though the rest of the senior people, by the looks of it, weren't, this individual was. And so what I could, when I was there with my friend, over the course of those few hours, it became clear, one, that this person was a player. It became clear what the motivation was, and it also became pretty clear what the pattern, that person's pattern, the way he moved towards achieving his goals, right?
Okay.
Very valuable information going forward, because even though my friend he paid some attention to it, but exactly which I described,
It happened.
It happened in spades, and in fact, right now he's engaged in a situation where he's having to engage with exactly this aspect of that person's character, which at the time he wasn't really, let's just say it didn't fit into his belief system to accept that what I was describing could be true, because it was perceived as being too negative. Now, when you're dealing with a CEO, you're not dealing with that kind of individual in the sense of having a very, let's just say, optimistic view of humanity.
Yeah.
The typical CEO would be quite the opposite.
Yeah.
If anything, they would be inclined to be cynical, so that would not be an issue for them.
No, my question is, what you just described, a CEO could, or a person who is running a company could just tell you, oh, I have that ability by observing others anyhow based on experience. But what I'm trying to ask you is the part of the Tai Chi that roles play in that.
Well, what ends up happening then, okay, let's say in that situation, what you could do is model out. If you're going to engage with that individual, like an example, if you're engaging with a player, the player essentially is aggressive. They're always having to move.
Okay.
So one of the things too is that if you're able to stay still long enough, this person has to show their hand. And once they show their hand, one of the things you do in Tai Chi basically is you either cause them to overextend, or essentially you uproot them. In a sense, by uprooting them is that you draw in close, find out where their weakness is, and from that weakness you basically unbalance them and put them in a position where, as in Tai Chi they say, if you like the person, you just neutralize them, and if you don't like them, you finish them off.
Well, it's like a art of war kind of thing.
Ultimately, well, the art of war, as a matter of fact, is a direct application of Taoism to war, and in fact it's a fairly simplistic version of it.
We are getting to the end of the program, but just a quick question. In that scenario you just described about a friend of yours, why didn't you get them to have 5 minutes of Tai Chi?
Well, it didn't come up. But the other thing too is that...
No, I mean you could have that. You could apply that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, you could, except that, let's just say, here's a confrontational situation. You've got competing interests. You don't have two people within the same organization. You've got one person who's investing in another organization. So the person who's looking for the investor is looking for the person to come in, obviously with the greatest amount of money and take the smallest stake. The person who, in that case I'm representing, is one where he wishes to get first of all, determine whether it's worth going in. Two, if he's going to go in, what are the best terms? So what you have is essentially competing interests just by the nature of the fact that they're sitting on opposing sides of the fence.
No, I understand that part. What I'm saying is that is being observed, without including the Tai Chi. But you said at the beginning the Tai Chi gives you automatic self-awareness subconsciously. I mean, if you had the opportunity to ask them to just do 5 minutes of the Tai Chi, let's say, together, would that awareness comes up at the beginning? That
yes, actually, it's interesting. Oh no, if actually, to your point, absolutely. But it would have been...
So it was your failure not to get them engaged in the Tai Chi.
It wasn't really a possibility. But if the two had been placed in that, then my friend would absolutely have been given a very, very clear picture of that person's movement, which and would have then come to that conclusion much earlier. Absolutely.
Well, Too bad it's a little bit late for that, friend, but that was.
Well, no. I mean, no.
No. About the Tai Chi.
The situation continues, so it's never too late. It's just that better late
just
than never.
What I'm saying about that moment, that awareness. We are coming to the end of the program. First of all, thank you for all of this information. I never knew that Tai Chi could be that connected to that interaction that clearly, as you explained. Whether or not I believe in that to some extent, I am pretty sure there is a good philosophy behind that. How applicable is that? Still, we have to practice it to find some sort of the control or subject matter to apply to see how it really plays out. And I am pretty sure that you can manage to find a couple of CEOs to provide that opportunity for you. Yes. Folks, that was for the program for this Tuesday, 29th of March 2016. Please tune in next week, same place, same time. Thank you and good night.
Got my city, got my sim, got my baby, I'm rolling in. Well, she's gone on high. I know she's lost, she's gonna die. Used to give me supper in a $5 bill, sitting with the buds on the windowsill. I wish I could fly away